Hi, and welcome to VIBEZ Daily. This is a daily devotional curated by VIBEZ Church to help you practice the way of Jesus and be all that God has called you to be. You have joined us for our year-long series titled Devoted. Acts 2:42 tells us that the followers of Jesus were devoted to the apostles' teaching, to fellowship, to breaking of bread, and to prayer. This podcast was created to provide context and commentary for what you read each day. Just before our friends begin discussing today's reading, we want to invite you not only for fellowship, but for prayer as well. We have created the Vibe Daily Chat group to offer you fellowship and a community where you can state your observations, ask questions about the reading or the podcast. You can join us by downloading the VIBEZ Church app in your favorite app store. Click Join the Conversation and join us today. And finally, we hope that you can join us for prayer. Prayer happens Monday through Friday, and more information on that can be found on the VIBEZ Church app under prayer. Now, let's begin our conversation on today's reading.
All right. Welcome back to the VIBEZ Daily podcast. It is day 92 of our devoted series. We have been journeying through the entire Bible this year, started in Genesis, now find ourselves in 2 Samuel, and we'll just continue through that journey here this week. I am back and again joined by my wife, Victoria, as we sit here and talk about the Bible a little bit, talk about really all that's going on, how exciting it is. There's a lot that happens, particularly in the passages that we're in now. And so really excited to talk about that with you. But just before we get into 2 Samuel, as we like to do each week, like to start our week off with kind of a Bible-related question. And while we were reading through this, kind of preparing for this week, there were a couple passages that came across that kind of sparked this question. And my question to you is this: like, what is maybe your favorite kind of obscure Bible passage or verse or story, something that maybe most people would not have heard of or noticed that, you really like?
Yeah, I think, I'm glad you asked this one because I don't think I had one in mind so much. But once you did, I'm thinking of the story of Benaiah that comes later on this week, actually, in 2 Samuel chapter 23. And it's one of David's like valiant warriors, one of his like, strong men. He has 30 plus who he like notates here that have done some crazy things. And so this guy actually goes into, it says that he goes into a pit on a snowy day with a lion. And I just think it's so gangster. It's cold. I'm not doing anything in the snow. But then he also goes and he defeats like this Egyptian who's this like big warrior, and like the Egyptian has this big sword and Benaiah has nothing but a staff, but somehow he's able to go and wrestle this sword out of the Egyptian's arms and kills him with his own staff. And he ends up being the bodyguard of David's like the head of David's like bodyguard, and then eventually Solomon's too. So he like gets elevated and eventually he's over Solomon's army. But if you know me, I grew up in a household that watched nothing but action movies. So when I got to that chapter, it was super dope for me. I was like, oh yeah, these guys are getting down. Like some of the things they did, I was just like, okay, I don't know how gangster you gotta be, but they were on the next level.
Yeah, interesting. Cool.
Yeah. Yours?
Well, mine I think was probably more obscure, at least in my opinion. Until like The Chosen, if you watch The Chosen,
okay.
I think it comes to light a little bit more. But before that, it was something that like I don't think I had ever really noticed. But Luke 8 has these couple verses where it talks about the fact that like Jesus's ministry was supported by women. But like the part that was always crazy to me is that like one of those women, Joanna, is like the wife of somebody who pretty much like King Herod's accountant. Like he like works in King Herod's like home or in his palace. And like it's just, to me, like you talk about gangster, like I don't know, I think like getting yo people to pay for my ministry when like you hate me is just like super crazy to me.
Yeah.
Like the fact that Jesus was so compelling
Mm-hmm.
that like even in Herod's house, who Herod is, essentially an enemy of Jesus. Like
Yeah.
he's an enemy of his cousin John the Baptist, and really is not a fan of the kind of ministry that Jesus does. But to have somebody in his own home essentially like paying and funding his ministry by selling their possessions is, I don't know, it's just so crazy to me.
Yeah.
So it's just one of those stories where it's just like, yeah, like, you think you can hold me back, but even the people in your own home got my back. Like that's kind of crazy to me.
It is. The Chosen does a good job of highlighting that.
Yeah,
they did, so.
Yeah. So they bring Joanna out specifically, and she shares some stuff. But yeah, like, to me, I think Luke is the only person who even mentions her by name. So it's kind of, like I said, it's kind of obscure. In all 4 Gospels, it's just in those verses that it really mentions her and how she supported their ministry financially. So, yeah. Okay, cool. Well, let's go back to 2 Samuel. We left off at chapter 9 last week, kind of when we ended last week, and where we most recently left off, it was with King David. David is now the king. He has actually shown some kindness to one of the descendants of Saul. He was keeping his word in that, right? So it was Jonathan's son, Mephibosheth, and that was kind of the last thing that we left off with. Pretty much the rest of 2 Samuel is about King David. That's kind of what we have here. So we will talk about him all week long, essentially. So we pick up here in chapter 10. And in chapter 10, it just kind of starts to talk about some wars that David has with the Ammonites, like a war that he has with the Ammonites. And he kind of just goes to war here. And interesting story kind of before David's family starts having some drama here shortly. But just before that, they have this war here, and his people are kind of embarrassed. They come back with like half their beard shaved off. Is really interesting. What did you find interesting about this war specifically here in 10?
Yeah, I think it was interesting that like off top they just like disrespected David's people, like didn't give him a chance or anything like that. And that, he was just like, okay, like, well, let's fight. And it's so interesting to me. It's like, at this point, they probably have heard of the people that they've conquered by now. And so it's like, why would you pick a fight with David? Like, why would y'all do that? Like, shouldn't you just try and keep the peace? Like, there's a lot of them. Like, he's ruler, and he's a mighty warrior, and he has songs and everything. So why would we do this? So I do think it was interesting, but I don't know. Anything else for you?
Yeah, I mean, well, I think what jumps out to me is that it started with David actually trying to show an act of kindness, right? Like, he was like, yo, Pops just died, man. Let me come and, send you something to console you and give you a gift. Like, let me send flowers to the house, whatever the case may be. And they took it as like, nah, like, even though he did this, ain't no way he would be kind to you, right? Like, there's no reason to believe he's actually showing respect for your father. And I don't know, I was just struck by how much they just misunderstood his gesture.
Yeah.
Like, he attempted to be kind, and his kindness, like, they just still didn't trust him. And I don't know, it's really hard. I think even just kind of from a practical standpoint, I know that like there could be, to me, it brings up like that passage in 1 Corinthians 13 that tells you like keep no record of wrong, right? Like this ability that like love can say like what happened in the past, I'm gonna let go and move forward. And it's like, to me, these Ammonites just, all they were focused on was the past, like what he had done. And I remember like my pastor back home used to say, like, I can't remember where he got it from, but ultimately would say, I may have done the things you say I've done, but like I'm not who you say I am, essentially, right? And so like there's this idea that ultimately I know that we have history, but can you take me at who I am right now, right? And what I'm trying to do for you right now. And so I don't know, to me it's just crazy that all this started just because they just couldn't take him at his word, like who he said he was now and what he was trying to do for them in that season.
Yeah. And it cost them big time.
Yeah.
Right? Like they called the Syrians over to help them, and they both got waxed.
Yeah.
And I feel they even lost like a compadre because the Syrians was like, yeah, no, we not helping y'all anymore.
Right.
We not gonna do that anymore. But yeah, I mean there's a lot of people that died, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Yeah, so like you said, I mean, David ultimately sends the best that he has, right?
Yeah.
He sends his Joab and his elite troops. Joab he be putting in work. Like
Joab's
we'll
on
see.
missions.
Yeah, which we'll see kind of here. Joab be putting in work. So he sends out the best of the best, and as you said, they conquer him. 700. I mean, I'm looking at like 700 charioteers, and like I mean, there's all sorts of numbers here that just kind of they ultimately win and win big. But you know, I'm sure this story is significant for the Israelites in their time. Like we may not know exactly why this was, particularly significant for them, but this helps them understand some context. It's probably history with that people at that time. So they give us that story in chapter 10, and then we move to chapter 11, and this is, we left off Friday, and we said like, David's good, man. He's a good guy. He's a good guy. So much we can learn from him. He's great. Let's leave on a good note, on a high note on Friday, because when we come back on Monday, David's gonna let us down a little bit, and it starts here in chapter.
It starts here. It's interesting how this book goes, because it's like he wins, he's doing great, and then there's like this middle part where he's like his failures, and in the end, just like a little bit of greatness as he leaves, blessings, and that's it.
Yeah. So we get here at chapter 11, and this is a story I think is pretty known. I mean, when you think of David's life, obviously David and Goliath story is probably most well known, not even just of his life, but probably in all of scripture, right? Transcends culture. There's that. We know he's on the run. His Psalm 23, maybe another thing that's just kind of really popular. But this particular story is one that a lot of people are familiar with. It's pretty much David's sin with Bathsheba. And just kind of how that plays out. So, quick summary as you kind of get into some of the things that were interesting. David sees a woman bathing, Bathsheba, desires her. Calls her to his palace, sleeps with her, gets her pregnant, and then tries to essentially trick her husband, because it's a married woman. I probably should have led with that. But a married woman tries to get her husband to sleep with her so that he thinks it's her baby, his baby. But he's an honorable guy, and he chooses not to do that, and so he results in having him murdered so that he can ultimately take Bathsheba for his wife. So we'll get to kind of the consequence of that in chapter 12, but what jumped out to you as you read it this time here in chapter 11? Was there anything that you felt was specifically or particularly significant for you?
Verse 1, let's just start there.
Okay.
Let's start at verse 1, where it says, in the spring, the time when kings go out to battle. But David sent Joab and his servants, and David remained in Jerusalem. Sir.
Yeah.
You supposed to be out of battle. First of all, why are you at home when this is the time where kings leave? Like, you got Joab doing all your work right now. Like we just said, he's been on missions. And so, to me already, it's just like, David, you in the wrong place at the wrong time. Like, you already set yourself up. But, and then just even when he inquires of who this woman is, he said Uriah the Hittite. Well, Uriah is not just like any old guy. Like, who's Uriah? Like, as we see in chapter 23 later on, he's one of
his 30. This is one of his like road dogs, like lead soldiers. Like,
he's one of the 30.
Yeah, this is like, he the homie. Uriah is the homie. Like, Uriah has been fighting for you. Yeah.
And riding with you. And is like a prominent person in your life.
Yeah.
And so when they say this is Uriah's wife, like, you should have been like, oh yeah, like, out of respect for my dude. Like, yeah, right? That's my guy. Who's out fighting for you right now.
Yeah.
you should have been like, that's off limits.
Yeah.
But nah, he's
Straight
just
party
like,
foul.
he's just like, oh yeah, bring her. And the fact that they even noted that she had been purifying herself from uncleanness, right? That like, this is like right at the point where like she's available again. And I'm just like, you just.
Yeah, it's so many. Like you said, there's so many things in that. You're right. It is cold on so many levels. His relationship with Uriah, like you said, Bathsheba, kind of where she is. But it does, as you brought out, kind of chapter verse 1 and verse 2. To me, it does show like just the dangers of one, not being where you're supposed to be.
Yeah.
When you're supposed to be there, right? And then 2, there's that old saying, man, an idle mind is a devil's workshop type of thing, which is not scripture, but it's just kind of like a wise saying. And like, I mean, he's out here just strolling on the roof, right, of the palace, like, and I'm sitting there thinking this is the danger. Like, you just out here.
You got too much time, David.
Too much time in your hand. You're not doing nothing productive, and yeah, you just see this beautiful woman, like, and now all of a sudden you in trouble. Like, you doing the wrong thing. And like, I also just, and I know he the king, but like, it was also messed up to me. Like, I just feel like nobody said like, bro, like, okay, not only is that Uriah's wife, but like, nah, bro, you shouldn't bring her up here.
Yeah.
Like,
I mean, because it's one thing if he looked at her and just was like, oh wow, she bad, bring me one of my concubines, because I feel a little something, like. I'm just saying, he had mad women at his disposal. Like, if he was feeling a certain type of way. That's how you
think we got it.
That's how guys talk, right? That's how they talk.
That's how we think.
I do. He had plenty. He had plenty,
which you'll find out later. That's part of the issue.
That's part of the issue.
But yeah.
So yeah, I just but this was this part was hard. I was telling you, I was trying to explain this to my 7-year-old. Why would we having you messed up? So I'm trying to explain like how this baby is David's and not her husband's. This is messing parents up here. I mean, This is good. This is good stuff to be teaching at some point. But she hit me with that, mommy. Well, how is it David's baby and not her husband's? I was like, Holy Spirit, help your girl.
Yeah.
Help your girl explain this, because you're right, baby. This should not be. Yeah. Even the child knows that this shouldn't be. But I think it's super messed up, like you said. He gets her pregnant, and all of a sudden, he's trying to cover it up. Yeah,
you start putting parental advisory or whatever on the Bible, on our passages. You gotta start doing that, because the Bible is
the children's Bible. Listen, please go grab your parent.
Yeah.
To read the next passage.
To read this passage, yeah, you need your parents' help. Yeah. So I mean, again, it's crazy. Ultimately, Uriah is more honorable than David, right? Like, Uriah comes back, and while David is back when he should be at war, and is doing all the stuff he shouldn't be doing, right? Because if he was at war, he wouldn't be doing this.
Yeah.
Like, when they were at war, they weren't with women. Like, they were intentionally not with women. And so, like, he's with women, even though he shouldn't be, right? Because he should be at war. Uriah comes back, and he still honors that, because he's like, my boys is out there at war. Yeah. Like, he's more a ride and die for his boys than David is, right?
Yeah.
And so ultimately, David plots to have him killed, and
but not only like sends him back to be killed, sends him back with a letter in his own hands, sentencing his own death.
Yeah.
Right? The fact that David wrote a letter, and in verse 14 it says, he wrote a letter to Joab and sent it by the hand of Uriah.
Yeah.
In the letter it wrote, set Uriah in the forefront of the hardest fighting, and then draw back from him, that he may be struck down and die. Like, you are, like, in Uriah, he said it's honorable. He not, ain't nobody opening the king's mail,
right,
and reading this, but it's taking this letter, and it's ultimately his death sentence. And like you said, he shouldn't be just out here dying in war, because he's one of the best.
Yeah.
Like, it has to be intentional. Like,
yeah,
it's not like, how Saul used to hope, like, oh, I hope David just dies in battle, against the Philistines. Like,
Yeah.
he can't just hope he'll die in battle, because no, he's the best of the best. He's trained. Like,
Yeah.
it's gonna be hard.
Yeah.
For that to happen. So he said he had to intentionally give instructions on how to make sure that he died. Like, y'all gotta go through some dire lengths. Do stuff that you would never do.
Yeah.
Get close and then fall back and leave him by himself.
Yeah. 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 So it's cold, and man, they bring the report to David, and I mean, it's just real cold how they kind of reported like he would have been mad if they did this in any other circumstance, but because they could add to the end of it, and Uriah, your servant, died, it's like, oh, go in peace, like just mourn,
Be strengthened.
be strengthened. Yeah. So, but kind of ends with, man, Bathsheba hears her husband dies, she mourns, and then David takes her to be his wife, which I don't know, man. Like, I can't speak to. We'll get to Bathsheba shows up more later. Can't speak to how she felt about all this, what her opinions were about all this. I don't know. Maybe she liked David, then like Uriah. I don't know. We don't know any of that. But to have to marry the guy that murdered her husband, it just kind of seems like not a fun situation there. But
yeah,
she gets pregnant. She bears him a son. And it takes us to chapter 12, where Nathan, the prophet, shows up and kind of sets David up a little bit. Tells a story, this parable about this man with all these sheep and all this other stuff. He's wealthy. And this other guy who only has one.
One. Lowly.
Just the one.
The family friend.
Yeah. And the guy with the rich man takes the one sheep and offers it as a sacrifice. Steals that man's sheep, sets him up, has David furious, and then pulls the rug right from under him and says, "Man, that's you.
Yeah,
that's what you just did." What do you find interesting here in chapter 12?
Yeah, I think it was interesting how furious David was. That man chopped up.
Yeah.
Whoever does this, and yeah, like you said, it's like, oh, that man's you. And it's so funny because sometimes it takes a story like that, or like a scenario like that, to show us who we are, like in our own actions. Because I mean, at this point, David's gotten over and he got by. Like, he thinks he's like in the clear, but like, God sees all, right? And I feel like this is what God is like. You might have thought you got away with it because you king and everybody gets to obey you and all that, but like, don't forget, like, I'm king, like I'm your king, and I've seen what you've done, and this isn't right, and as a result, the consequences, this child is going to die, like,
so that's good. I think like there's a few things that, like you said, just one, that mirror piece. The other two things that jump out to me about it is, you just mentioned, like, what we think we got away with, right? What's done in the dark. Like, man, God sees all. Like, it doesn't matter how well thought out and planned you think it is, man, judgment will come. There will be consequences, because God sees it. But I think the other thing that I think is interesting is, I think we know what it points out to me about David. It's like, we know right from wrong. We know what is righteous. We tend to act outside of that anyway, right? When it's us, like when it's for us, like we will look at somebody else and clearly point out when they're doing something wrong, because we know the difference between right and wrong. It does not necessarily change what we do, though, right? Because like, in the moment of it all, he was fine with it. He did it, and he might have had some shame, but like, he still did it anyway.
Yeah, not enough.
But he was going to be okay going forward and live with that and be fine with taking that to his grave. You know what I'm saying? But like, again, to see that same sin in somebody else, like, it's repulsive. But often in our own selves, like, we find all the ways to lie, to justify it to ourselves, whatever, to make it be like, okay. And I think that's what David points out in that parable, the way, and that gets set up by Nathan. It's just like, you know this was wrong.
You do.
You know this is wrong.
Straight up.
You knew it was wrong if it was somebody else. don't you think it's wrong because it's you?
Mm-hmm.
Like, and I think that, again, it's just that thing to reflect on ourselves. Like, let's not be so quick to point out everybody else's sin when we're often doing some of those very same things.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's true. But just before we move on, though, like it even sets up this line of consequences when we say like his life kind of goes on the downhill, right? Like even just this, like there's this foretelling of, well, yeah, I'm gonna like take your wives, right, and but raise up evil against you out of your own house. This is like a foreshadow of what's to come, and so all of this wasn't just like one consequence. It was a bunch of consequences that came from this because the Lord was like, "This isn't right."
Yeah. 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 There's a lot that will happen here. But I'll say the end of chapter 12 is something that, well, let's, I guess, articulate the consequence. One of the big consequences was that son specifically will die, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the end of chapter 12 is one that I've always loved as really just an example of prayer and fasting for things that we seek and desire of the Lord. Because David then goes on a fast when the baby is born, knowing that the baby will die. He fasts and he mourns and he prays. And then the baby still dies, despite his best efforts for prayer and fasting. Baby dies. And he kind of gets up, cleans himself off, worships the Lord, and his servants is looking at him like he's crazy. Like, why in the world would you do this? And he says, I love it, verse 22, while the baby was alive, I fasted and wept because I thought, who knows? The Lord may be gracious to me and let him live. But now that he is dead, why should I fast? Can I bring him back again? I'll go to him, but he will never return to me. I just love this idea that, like, I will pray and fast until I have no reason to pray and fast anymore. Like, until God just flat out says no, or does what he says he was going to do, or whatever the case may be, until there is a point of no return. I'm praying and fast because maybe, just maybe, the Lord could be gracious to me and change that. And I think that's just, to me, I love that posture of doing that, but then being able to flip that switch to say, well, the Lord's will be done and I will praise him now.
Yeah.
Right? And I think in so many times in our lives, we're fine with the praying and the fasting, but when we don't get the result we want,
That part.
we grieve, or we complain, or we get upset, or we turn away from God altogether, rather than saying, Lord, your will be done. I'm gonna praise you and I'm gonna worship you because you are still good. And maybe you would have been gracious, which is not deserved, right? I don't deserve your grace, right? That's the whole reason it's grace. But I'm still gonna praise you, and I think it challenges me to say that even in those times I don't get what I want, can I still praise him?
That's so good.
Yeah.
That's so good. Yeah. And like even in his actions, right? Because he could have just been sulking around still. Like in his actions, he got up, he washed up, he ate, like he went on with joy for the most part, right?
Yeah.
Still grieving, but joy. And he goes on to comfort Bathsheba, and she gives birth to another son. And I didn't realize that his son had another name, Jedediah. I don't know why that never stuck out to me before.
Well, because it's probably the only time it's mentioned.
Yeah.
It's never mentioned again. He goes by Solomon for the rest of history, essentially. Yeah, Nathan kind of gives him his nickname.
Yeah.
Okay. So there's kind of another war that happens here at the end, a little battle, I should say, that happens here at the end. But just to kind of bring our day to a conclusion, we get to chapter 13. It's kind of our last passage for today. And this starts more drama in his family. And again, a lot of this is the result of his sin, right? Is now the drama in his family really begins. So what stands out to you in chapter 13? It's kind of a longer chapter, but it goes through this story of Tamar, Amnon, Absalom, kind of Absalom and Amnon, sons of David, and Tamar, the sister of Absalom. And so, I guess quick summary, since it's a little long. Absalom has a sister, Amnon, who's essentially, I guess, her half brother, is infatuated with her,
Mm-hmm.
so much so that he devises a scheme. He and a friend of his devises a scheme to essentially sleep with her against her will. And once he does, it's just like disgusted with her, no longer wants her, and has pretty much just not only defiled her, but really just embarrassed her. And her brother Absalom is not happy about this. He is very upset. And so then he devises a scheme at some point to kill Amnon. That's kind of where we get left off here at the end of 13 before we'll hear a little bit more about Absalom tomorrow. But yeah, what jumped out to you here in chapter 13?
Yeah. I think first of all, for me, it was more so like this desire of the heart can be just so misleading, right? Or like this lust that he had. Like in my version, it says that in verse 2 that he was tormented. And that he made himself ill because of her. Like that. Like he just could not stand not having her. And I feel like just be weird. Like beware. Like that just, it does not seem like godly motive there, right? Like when something torments you so much or is captured your attention so much that like you can't function or like that's all your mind is wrapped around, like, it really should be like a place to pause and be like, this could be dangerous. Like,
that's good.
This I might not be able to should dabble in this. But yeah, because like you said, once he gets it, that's how you know it was a trick of the enemy, right? Because once he gets it, it gets her, all of a sudden it's like a flip switch. And he hates her. And I just...
Even more than he loved her.
Even more than he loved her.
Yeah.
And I'm like, that wasn't love.
Yeah.
Like, that was not love. That was lust and... I can't even think of the other words right now, but like it just... This ill will desire like that he had. And so... to me, it was just like, man, like... You could have gone about it the right way. He said, with a little bit of patience, like Tamar had said, like, just marry me. Like, ask your father that you can have my hand. Do it the right way. But, like, it was impatient. It was, rushed. It was, like, deceitful and violent, and so all these things. But the one part that tripped me out was just my heart grieved for Tamar. Was in 21, where it's like when King David heard of all these things, he was very angry. Okay, but you didn't do anything, right? Like you're the king with all this power. Like you just found out that your son has raped me, and you've done nothing but be angry. Like that part to me, like as a daughter looking for a father to, protect or. Come to her aid. Like that's kind of hurtful just to know that you knew it, you outraged, but not outraged enough, or whatever the reasons might be, you didn't feel like you wanted to ruffle the feathers to, reconcile, make this situation right? And so, I can't totally be mad about Absalom, but I feel like he had to do something about it because nobody else was doing anything about it. Anyways, your thoughts?
Yeah, no, that's a good perspective. It reminds me a little bit of Israel's sons, right? And I can't recall which daughter it was. Delilah. Don't quote me on that. But which daughter it was that ultimately was, kind of taken advantage of as well. And as you said, Israel doesn't do anything. It's his sons that like are like, wait, hold up, like this is not gonna happen to my sister. And then, they all get circumcised and then they kill them while they're like, recovering. And yeah, just that reflection as a daughter in that situation and kind of what that would feel like that's real. Yeah, that's good. And seeing that pattern is a little tough, right? Like seeing that history or that pattern of that happening in scripture, definitely tough. I think what jumped out to me is going back to your original point. I do think that this passage is a warning, as you said, of the lust of our hearts. As you said, just being careful about those things that consume you that much, right? That if you think about just the layers of this, it consumed him so much that he was willing to lie and be deceitful to get it, right? And like the fact that he had to sin to get it. And we could talk about all the different things that this could relate to, right? Whether it's substance abuse or success at work, right? And money or whatever. But I think we can also just be real about sex specifically and say, like, even in that specific application, like being very like introspective and careful with what you are willing to do, to get that, just because you're attracted to someone or infatuated with someone or want, desire someone in that way. As you said, it was clear he didn't love her. If he had, he would have married her, right? But to confuse, that's the other thing, just to confuse that feeling of lust for love, I think it's just really a warning for all of us, and being clear on that specifically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I wonder if King David didn't do anything because he had pretty much just done the same thing. Lucky.
Yeah, it's hard to judge when, like you said, you pretty much guilty of the exact same thing just recently. A good point. Which again is not right. You still hold people accountable to the standard even when you can't live up to it yourself. So yeah, I mean, there's also obviously his friend Jonadab. Again, we've seen this thing before, man. Who you have in your circle, and we'll keep seeing that in the Kings particularly. But like, who you have in your circle can be a huge problem.
Yeah, it matters.
Yeah,
who's in your ear?
Right, because he's the one who comes up with the whole scheme of like what he should do. So ultimately, Absalom, as we said, man, plans to murder him, and he does so. Finds a way to do it a couple years later, actually. And yeah, after that, he kind of goes on the run because obviously he just killed the king's son. So one way or the other, whether it was his sister's brother or not, it's still the king's son. And he kind of goes on the run. So anything else that stuck out to you here in 13 before we kind of wrap up here for today?
Yeah, I mean, it's good the king loved his sons. That's what I do see here. Like, he mourned and wept for Amnon, and he mourned and wept when Absalom fled and was away from him. Like, he left his son. But yeah, it's a lot.
Yeah, a lot going on. Yeah, we'll see that conflict with his love for his sons play out a little bit more here. But yeah, that'll bring us to the end of today's discussion. We'll talk a little bit more about Absalom tomorrow, specifically. But yeah, appreciate you guys joining us today for our discussion. Hopefully this was helpful. I know it's kind of a lot of really in those 4 chapters, kind of heavy in some of that discussion, but again, hopefully it's helpful context and discussion. Come back, join us tomorrow. We'll pick up at chapter 14, and yeah, we'll continue to hear about King David's story. But until then, take care.
Thank you for joining us for the VIBEZ Daily podcast. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform, or download our favorite, the VIBEZ Church app. Visit vibes.church/devoted for additional episodes, notes, details, and the latest merch. Join us next time as we continue our journey through the Bible. Take good care.